Is it French?
I thought Beck said
it French
rentier.
I think I said just renter. I think I said rentier. I don't know.
French for I haven't got enough deposit for a house.
One aspect is that the Aussie survey says that property managers, because looking after rentals is seen to be the poor cousin of a job compared with selling houses, that property managers need better training. And that would probably be essential for making sure that the landlords themselves aren't disadvantaged, because you do hear reports of property managers not doing their jobs properly, are they?
Yeah, are they not licensed the same way real estate agents are?
Oh, I'm sure.
Perhaps they should be.
But I mean, that's one recommendation over there. And there are increasing concerns, by the way, over data collection about tenants, presumably so landlords can weed out the so-called bad ones. There's a renters ranking, and it's certainly prevalent in Australia. Is this fair enough, or is it building up a profile of you as a renter that you should fully know about?
Well, if you've been a renter and you've wrecked a couple of houses, I think landlords have the right to know that. If it's purely similar to our immigration debate, because of your ethnicity, your gender, your age, that you get into the realms. It's a grey area there, isn't it? I mean, people have the right to pick who they want to live in their house that they own, but on the other hand, you also can't discriminate on those bases, can you? And nor should you be able to, because that leads to the consequences of that.
Sometimes they can end up being just personal problems, between a landlord and a renter, and I guess that is the danger. I mean, I guess the main thing, pay your rent and keep the house in a reasonable manner, and that's all you have to do, really.
We've got a couple of minutes, and we might end on a lighter note today. It's been a fairly hefty panel. In the Melbourne Age today, advice for when you forget someone's name. Does this happen to you?
No, John. Never. Surely you saw that one coming, Jim, didn't you? Surely you saw that crusty old joke. Let me just blow dust off that joke book.
What do both of you do?
Oh, this is where the great God above that invented New Zealand colloquialisms invented mate and pal and bro and cuz, and that's saved me many a time. Let me tell you, cuz. Does it fool people? Does it fool people, Ray? G'day, mate, or how are you, bro? I suppose it depends if it's your normal manner of address. I tell you what, my friend, comedian Mike King, had a great one. Because when you're in a public eye, you get people coming up and saying, hello to you, and you're not sure whether you don't know them, or you do know them, you just can't remember them. So he would do, when did I last see you? And do it that way, and give himself some time to. That's quite clever. To try to place them, and or. What's your name? And he goes, it's John. No, your last name. I knew your first name.
Oh, that's very clever.
Well, the Age advises to immediately take the blame. Don't say, how are you, bro? Avoid the words forgot and can't remember. Focus on the positive. For example, hello, you. I know we met at Sam and Sarah's barbecue because I loved your story about the blue dog, but I've just had a brain freeze regarding your name.
Would you say it like that, Jim? Because I think there's some
that was a rather theatrical delivery, wasn't
it? Awkward social moments, if that's how you talk to people, Jim. I've got to be honest with you.
Well, the other recommendation is when you're introduced, say their name 3 times in the first 10 seconds.
Yes, do that.
It's just creepy.
Good to meet you, Kayla. Great name, Kayla.
Other thing is to blame yourself. I'm an idiot. I got a memory like a sieve. Forgive me. You got to tell me your name.
Okay.
Look forward to your rat character, Andrew.
Andrew Clay. It'll be a good one too. Andrew Clay, Beck 11 on the panel. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And Checkpoint is coming up now.
Toti mai rā e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, last night we revealed $160 million has already been spent re-repairing quake-damaged Christchurch. That's not including cash settlements. We believe the Minister, Megan Woods, has tonight been given the cash settlement figure. We believe it is significant, and we hope she will join us on the program to tell us how much it is. Also tonight, the Immigration Minister demands a police explain after Immigration New Zealand is accused of racially profiling overstayers. Radio New Zealand's board chair and CEO front up in Parliament this morning to apologise for misleading a committee. And first it was closing, now it's not. Kaikohe locals react to news the warehouse, which employs 60 locals, will stay open.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. One of the country's largest Tongan groups fears an Immigration New Zealand profiling program could unfairly target Pacifica people. The department has been modelling data including the age, gender and ethnicity of overstayers to identify which groups are more likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime. It then uses that information to prioritise which people it should take action against. Most overstayers are from Tonga, Samoa and China. Melino Maka from the Tongan Advisory Council fears Pacifica people could be unfairly targeted like they were in the 70s in the Dawn raids.
And this is a bring back of the Dawn raid. You can see the language they use, using up our health system, you know. There's the same language they use in America and in Europe to justify using some of those racist policies, that we don't need here in New Zealand.
Melino Maka. The warehouse's Kaikohi's landlord says he was bullied into signing a lease on the company's terms after it threatened to close the store. The warehouse announced last night it was closing, blaming the landlord, but said this morning it was now able to stay open because he had come back to negotiations. But the landlord, John Levers, says the company told him it would close the store if he didn't agree to cut the length and value of the lease. He says when he tried to stick to his guns, they followed through on their threat.
For them to turn around and say that, this happened because of the landlord, well, yeah, the landlord was trying to stand up for himself, and unfortunately the big bully just got too much. So now I've folded and they've got what they want and I'm screwed.
Landlord John Levers. The warehouse says it does not agree with Mr Levers' version, saying it was him that rejected the company's offer and he was not forced into anything. RNZ says if it can recover a voicemail message from the Broadcasting Minister to the chair of its board, it will release it to a parliamentary select committee. RNZ's bosses have apologised today for inadvertently misleading the committee over a meeting that cost the broadcaster Carol Hirschfeld her job. At the end of the hearing, National's Melissa Lee asked RNZ to hand over all communications between Ms Hirschfeld and the Minister Claire Curran, as well as a voicemail left on Mr Griffin's phone. He's previously suggested the message urged him and the CEO to write a letter to the committee to avoid appearing in person. Ms Lee says RNZ is now subject to a formal request.
I'm presuming that RNZ would actually consider it quite an urgent matter and they would be provided promptly. I'm guessing it's sometime next week.
Melissa Lee. Claire Curran denies any suggestion she tried to prevent RNZ reappearing today. Australia says it's begun an investigation to decide whether the social media company Facebook breached its privacy laws after the company confirmed data from 300,000 Australian users may have been used without authorisation. Facebook said today personal information of up to 87 million users, mostly in the United States, may have been improperly shared with political consultancy Cambridge Analytica. The previous estimates had been more than 50 million. The 12 surviving pilot whales out of a pod of 38 that stranded on a remote West Coast beach have had to be euthanased. The pod stranded sometime yesterday on either side of the Okuru River mouth, south of Haast. The surviving whales were comforted by Department of Conservation rangers, local iwi and other volunteers today, but it was not possible to refloat them at high tide this afternoon. Rough seas and strong tidal currents in the adjoining lagoon meant a rescue carried too much risk. A DOC spokesperson says euthanasing the whales was a sad outcome, but it was the most humane thing to do. New Zealand Chef de Mission Rob Waddell says Blackfern's Sevens team members remain in good spirits despite being in isolation and their teammate hospitalised with the mumps. No one else in the team has contracted the virus. Ruby Tui's Commonwealth Games appear to be over. She's in the Sunshine Coast Hospital in a stable condition. Waddell says the team has been surrounded by support and they're taking it in their stride.
We've had doctors up there. We've also had our head sports psych as well, and the feedback we've had is that they've been pleased to know all the information, understand it, and know what's going on, and they're feeling positive about things.
Rob Waddell. The Blackferns start their Commonwealth Games campaign on Friday week. It's 5 past 5. The velodrome is shaping up as the venue for New Zealand's first medal of the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. The New Zealand men's track cycling sprint team says they addressed the failings of last month's World Championships after finishing a disappointing 6th, having gone into the event as the defending champions. Ethan Mitchell says that humiliation highlighted some flaws, and he says they've addressed those as they attempt to defend their Commonwealth Games title.
It was just certainly a reminder on how much execution matters. Obviously races are won and lost in under 1/10 of a second, and for us to go out there and be on the wrong side of that this time was a wake-up call around, certainly some training adaptations, and then motivating for us leading into here to really hone in on that execution and to produce something that we're super proud of.
Ethan Mitchell. In the triathlon today, Ryan Sissons was the best placed of the New Zealanders in 5th place. The gold medal was won by South African Henry Schumann, while Nicole van der Kay was the best placed of the New Zealand women in 7th, with Bermuda's Flora Duffy first. Meanwhile, the New Zealand women's hockey team have enjoyed a comprehensive win over Scotland in their opening match at the Games, with a 6-1 win over Scotland. And Australia's world champion 100 metres hurdler Sally Pearson has been forced to withdraw from her home games as she battles a serious Achilles injury. And that's the news.
Recalling faulty airbags.
We think the risk is about 1 in 400, but with alpha type it's considerably higher. It may be as much as 1 in 10.
Recalling events.
I didn't have any notes from the meeting.
Isn't that a bit of a problem though, if your memory's on the blink?
So, there was no interference.
And recalling great moments of history.
He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land.
The first draft of history. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what new recordings of Moorpork calls are telling us about the health of our forests, and after 10, the unconventional fossil hunter, whose discoveries have changed our view of the story of human evolution. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough. Mostly fine weather, however, the odd shower possible about East Cape, Coromandel, Auckland and Northland tomorrow. For Canterbury, fine with high cloud tomorrow and scattered evening rain south of Christchurch. Otago, also Bulla and Westland, fine, but a few showers about southern Westland at first tomorrow. Then rain spreading northwards through all areas during the afternoon and evening, and isolated thunderstorms in Westland. For Southland, a period of rain tomorrow, briefly heavy, clearing during the afternoon, but a few coastal showers returning at night. And for Fiordland, occasional rain, heavy for a time tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms, but they will clear later. And for the Chatham Islands, fine weather. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin tonight with breaking news, and this really is breaking news. Last night, Checkpoint revealed $160 million has so far been spent on repairing the repairs to earthquake-damaged Canterbury homes. We also revealed it was more than twice the sum predicted as the overall cost of re-repairs less than 2 years ago. In Parliament in June 2016, the then Minister Jerry Brownlee answered a question. As for the cost of the second-time repairs, it is estimated they will be in the vicinity of some $60 to $70 million overall. As we learned yesterday, that went to $160 million, but we also revealed last night that that figure was only for managed re-repairs and did not include cash settlements paid out to people who then took care of their own re-repairs. Just before we came on air, and I'm holding the paperwork, we were given that figure by EQC. It is a further $100 million. EQC has just told us 8,000 properties had a remedial issue lodged. This is problems with repairs or scoping that led to a total of $100 million in cash settlements. That's over and above the figure of $160 million we gave you last night. And that figure has now increased by $10 million to $170 million as at 3 a.m. this morning. So, and we're still doing the maths and we're still waiting to talk to somebody on the record about this. Checkpoint now believes the total cost of repairs and remediation to repair work done under the Canterbury Home Repair Program is $270 million. That's more than $250 million and 4 times the estimate in Parliament less than 2 years ago. The Minister, we understand, is just being briefed on these numbers. We hope she will join us after 6 o'clock tonight. That is our understanding of what is going to happen Joining us live now is Christchurch lawyer Peter Woods of Anthony Harper. Peter, are you there?
Hi, John. Yes, I'm here.
Hi, nice to talk to you. Now, look, I know that we've got these figures and you haven't, and you will have heard me read them out there, but just to establish your bona fides, tell us how many actions homeowners, people under the Canterbury Home Repair Program, you are representing or have represented against EQC.
Over 200.
Over 200, right. Are you surprised by the figure of 8,000 properties that have had a cash settlement for remedial issues, that is repairs to repairs or inadequate scoping or inadequate repairs?
Well, John, look, the figures are a real shambles, aren't they? We were told in May 2016 that there were about 8,400 remedial inquiries. Since then, there will have been thousands more lodged with EQC. In May 2016, we were told they'd paid $7 million to settle 2,200 claims. So the 6,000 they've settled since then have cost, well, I'm sorry, I've lost track of your figures, but about $153 million, I think, for the 6,000 when they had settled 2,000 for $7 million. The figures really don't stack up, do they?
I'm really confused about this, but we think the totals are right. We have these totals from EQC. So what we now believe very strongly, and we wouldn't report this if we didn't think with a great degree of certainty this was the case, 170 million has now been paid out in managed re-repairs, and a further 100 million has been paid out in cash so that people could take care of their own re-repairs, a total of $270 million. Now, what that means is that what it must mean is that there is a very much higher callback rate or re-repair rate than we have ever been told. And I'm going back now in my head to that IMBI report in 2015, which looked under homes, and it only had a sample of 101 from memory, 11 of which had no structural issues, so it only had a real sample of 90. But it found that 32 of them, so roughly a third, were non-compliant with the building code. Now that is starting to look like a pretty adequate predictor of what's happened since.
That's right, and you've got to remember that IMBI survey was actually the homes they looked at had been selected by the insurers and EQC. They weren't the worst cases. In fact, if you'd complained to EQC, you were excluded from that survey. So I expect the figures are going to be much higher than that.
You have also said on Checkpoint before, and I was really arrested by this, that there are still an unknown number of properties in Canterbury where people believe in good faith the repairs they had or the scoping they had from EQC were adequate, full and final, and they don't yet know that re-repairs or remediation are required.
That's right. I think there's hundreds, if not thousands of those. And they're mainly the pre-1970s homes with the rubble foundations.
Can you tell me about those foundations? So what was taking place underneath the floors of homes in Canterbury before 1970? Because this is really material, because time after time after time when EQC scopes or EQC repair work missed structural damage, it was in the foundations, wasn't it?
That's right, and if you haven't got the foundations fixed properly, you haven't really fixed the rest of the house properly either. So most of the cases we're dealing with for pre-1970s homes, the concrete perimeter ring and the piles aren't what we now call modern or good concrete. It was quite acceptable for builders to bulk up the foundation by chucking boulders and bricks and other materials into the foundation. That means that, I'm sorry, I'm not a structural engineer, but in my layman's approach, it means the concrete is not as cohesive as modern concrete would be. And EQC assessed the damage to those foundations on the basis of the MBIE guidance, which deals with how you can repair earthquake damaged properties. But the MBIE guidance assumes that the concrete is modern, good concrete. And MBIE has very recently, it's confirmed expressly that its guidance does not apply to rubble foundations. It's taken years, but MBIE has accepted the concept of rubble foundations, and that there are many houses in Christchurch and New Zealand with rubble foundations, and that its guidance does not apply. So there's been a systemic failure by EQC right at the outset when it looked at those foundations, and it hasn't assessed the damage properly, and it certainly hasn't fixed it properly.
How many homes were done under the Canterbury Home Repair Program? I'm a bit confused about the overall number. I have two in my head. One is 67,000, which I have here in a briefing, an EQC briefing to the Minister Jerry Brownlee in April 2017. And one is slightly higher, 69,000. Do you know what the overall figure was?
No, I thought it was at 67,000.
Okay, let's work on 67,000. So we have 8,000 properties cash settled to the tune of about $100 million. And if people are listening and wondering what this is about, this is re-repairs. So we are not talking about repairs, which were absolutely natural and inevitable and substantial after the earthquakes. We're talking about repairs to the repairs, work that was missed or inadequate or not done completely or not done well enough. So we know there's $160 million has been spent on managed re-repairs. We now know that $100 million has been paid out in cash settlements to 8,000 properties that decided to take care of their own re-repairs. So we're looking at What's that?
Could I interrupt there?
Absolutely.
$100 million, that could have actually been paid to homeowners who are then pushed to their insurer to deal with a proper fix. So EQC could be paying what they say is their cap payment for the original damage in effect, and saying to the homeowner, now you go off to your insurer to deal with getting your house fixed properly.
And once again, for people outside Christchurch, I want to explain that. That means that EQC only pay up to $100,000, right?
That's right.
And then the insurer, if the repairs are substantial, the repairs to the repairs are substantial, and in structural foundation repairs they often are, the insurer would step in and pay more. But that's not part of EQC's payout, is it?
No, but it does mean the $100 million isn't enough to fix the homeowner's problem.
But what we're talking about of the 67,000 is now a large percentage of re-repairs, aren't we? We've got 8,000 that have been cash settled, more in financial terms that have been managed. So it would not be unreasonable to say, 15,000, 20,000 potentially have had some form of remediation?
Well, it's hard to get a firm figure on it, isn't it? But as you say, there were 8,300 as at 2016. There's 1,200 at the moment. That's over 10,000, and there'll be many more.
Right. Of course, we need to remind people this was a major event, two major earthquakes, September and February, a lot of substantial and large earthquakes after that, and in total there have been thousands of earthquakes in Christchurch. But one final comment from you, Peter Woods. Are you surprised by the extent of the re-repair work that has been required?
Oh, no, and there's a lot more that's got to be done. I think what we're seeing is that the claims for remedials now that are coming in are probably harder, probably more expensive, and taking more time for EQC to figure them out. So I'm sorry to say that the money they've spent so far is probably on the easier stuff, and it wouldn't surprise me if that figure's going to double.
Peter Woods, who is a lawyer for Anthony Harper, joining us live. This information just breaking, and we are trying to get the Minister. Obviously, she needs to be briefed, and she is. We have confirmed with her office that she is going to join us after the news at 6. So at the moment, we think that figure of 160 that we gave you last night has risen to a total of $270 million spent on re-repairing repairs. We'll have more later in the program. It's 19 minutes past 5. You are with Checkpoint. Immigration New Zealand is being accused of racially profiling overstayers as part of a pilot program it's been running to help it prioritise who it should deport. The Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, has called in officials for a please explain after only finding out about the program this morning when contacted by RNZ for Morning Report. As Sarah Robson reports, there are fears it could allow officials to unfairly target marginalised groups and harks back, some are saying, to the dawn raids of the 1970s.
For the past 18 months, Immigration New Zealand has been running a pilot profiling overstayers to prioritise which people it should take action against. To do that, it has been modelling data, including the age, gender and ethnicity of overstayers, to identify which groups are more likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime. The Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says when resources are limited, officials have to make calls about which people to deport.
All of these people, all 11,000 people, are liable for deportation. Immigration New Zealand has limited resources. They have to prioritise who they will take enforcement action against, and they are using a range of data to prioritise the people they think pose the greatest threat to New Zealand.
But Immigration New Zealand has been criticised for using ethnicity as part of its risk modelling. Melino Maka from the Tongan Advisory Council says it's racist, and he fears Pacifica people could be unfairly targeted.
And this is a bring back of the dawn rape. You can see the language they use, using up our health system, you know. There's the same language they use in America and in Europe to justify using some of those racist policies, you know, that we don't need here in New Zealand.
Most overstayers are from Tonga, Samoa and China. Campbell is a lawyer specialising in immigration and refugee issues. She says it's concerning that Immigration New Zealand is using ethnicity as part of its profiling, and that has the potential to further marginalise certain groups.
It is seriously concerning simply because it will be based on race. So if somebody is from a particular country, of a particular race, they will be deemed to be in this class, and a certain approach then will apply to them, a predetermination in how they are looked at.
But Ian Lees-Galloway denies the program is racial profiling.
If I got any suggestion that they were solely profiling people based on race, that would be unacceptable to me, and we would deal with that. But the advice I have received is they use a range of information, and they use that to prioritise who, amongst the people who are unlawfully in New Zealand, they will take enforcement action against.
A data analyst, Hakanwal Singh, says while predictive risk modelling is useful, it needs to be done in an open and transparent way. And he says as more and more government departments do it, there needs to be greater checks and balances.
There needs to be some independent checking of these models, because it's different if Facebook is using a model because it's a private company, but it's very different if a ministry or government is using models, because there needs to be more accountability over there.
And Hakanwal Singh says ethical issues need to be a part of that as well.
If you can use race to predict certain things, the question to ask is, should you be using it in the first place, considering human rights concerns and everything?
Both the Human Rights Commission and the Privacy Commissioner are seeking more details from Immigration New Zealand about the pilot program. Ian Lees-Galloway will get a full briefing from his officials about it tomorrow. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Right, we've been talking about the numbers. We just have a statement in from EQC Minister Megan Woods. Urgent advice requested by Minister Megan Woods has revealed the bill for EQC re-repairs has hit $270 million, over $200 million above the $70 million predicted by the previous national government. As of 4 April, $170 million has been spent on remediating claims managed through the repair process, with a further $100 million being spent on resettling homes that had been cash settled for initial repairs. The Minister says this is far beyond what the previous government told us and the public the issue would cost. In opposition, we warned the government they were not acting fast enough on the issue of botched repairs. I've met urgently with Treasury today to request more information on this issue. That statement from the Minister, who will join us live after the 6 p.m. news. The former Minister, Jerry Brownlee, refused to be interviewed by me yesterday and today or provide us with a statement. 24 minutes past 5. There have been further twists and turns in the controversy that cost the RNZ head of news, Carol Hirschfeld, her job. The CEO and board chairman fronted up in Parliament this morning to apologise for misleading MPs last month over a meeting between Ms Hirschfeld and Broadcasting Minister Claire Curran. RNZ has been asked to hand over all communications between the former news boss and the minister, as well as a voicemail the minister left on the phone of RNZ's chair, Richard Griffin. Ms Curran has also been accused of interference after Mr Griffin's account of a phone call he received from the minister's office. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
The RNZ board chair Richard Griffin told MPs it was acutely embarrassing to have to come back and correct the record. He and the CEO told the committee last month the meeting in December between the then head of news Carol Hirschfeld and Claire Curran was a chance encounter. It later emerged Ms Hirschfeld had lied to her boss and the meeting had been pre-planned.
I'm devastated that an attempt to cover up a prosaic meeting, and it was a prosaic meeting, in a Wellington cafe has resulted in the loss to RNZ of a valued and talented executive, damage to the RNZ's relationship with this new government at a critical time in the company's evolution.
CEO Paul Thompson sincerely apologised.
She gave me repeated assurances that the meeting was coincidental, that they had bumped into each other in the cafe and had talked. I questioned her on that intently, and I trusted her word.
The National MP Melissa Lee wanted to know about a phone call Mr Griffin received from the Minister's office the day after he had received a tip-off there was a problem with the version of events he had given to the committee. It was during that call it was confirmed to Mr Griffin he and the CEO had misled the committee.
I had a call from a Minister's staff officer to advise me that the Minister was facing 3 questions in the House that afternoon, that it was possible that those 3 questions would impinge on the meeting of December 5. The staff's attitude was, we will handle this appropriately, but we'd like you basically to stay out of it. I was gobsmacked, quite honestly, given that the information I'd received the day before I was taking with a grain of salt.
In a statement, the Minister's office said she was assured her staff did not say they expected there would be no comment from RNZ or that Richard Griffin was told the Minister's office would like RNZ to stay out of it. But Melissa Lee says if Mr Griffin's account is true, that's interference.
I think it would be inappropriate for a minister to be interfering in that. The thing is, this government is championing open government, and when there are questions asked, they should be forthcoming with the answers, and this minister hasn't done so.
Richard Griffin also came under pressure from Labour MPs about his decision to give Melissa Lee a heads up about Ms Hirschfeld's resignation minutes before it was made public on Tuesday last week. Mr Griffin said it was a matter of courtesy.
Which may be foreign to some in politics. I'm sorry, that's unnecessary.
Well, courtesy.
As a matter of courtesy, it was important. I felt we should contact the MP in the committee who was responsible for asking the questions, an advisor that would have to come back and explain ourselves.
There's courtesy and then there's collusion, and what I'm wanting to know is what are your rules and procedures at RNZ in terms of colluding with an opposition MP on employment or political matters?
Point of order.
That's a ridiculous question, with due respect.
The National MP Paul Goldsmith asked Richard Griffin about a voicemail he received from the Minister, urging him and Mr Thompson to correct the record.
Do you have the copy of the voice message with you? Could you play it to us now?
No, I won't, but I do.
So did you receive the implication that you shouldn't attend the Select Committee?
The implication was, as far as I was concerned, that it would be far more satisfactory to all concerned if we just put a letter on the table and left it at that.
Claire Curran, who's gone to Australia to attend the Commonwealth Games, denies any suggestion she tried to prevent RNZ reappearing today. When the hearing wrapped up, Melissa Lee asked RNZ to hand over communications, including the voicemail left on Mr Griffin's phone. She told reporters afterwards that's a formal request.
I'm presuming that, RNZ would actually consider it quite an urgent matter and they would be provided promptly. I'm guessing it's sometime next week.
RNZ says if it can recover the voicemail message from the Minister to the chair of its board, it will release it to the Select Committee. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
First it was closing, now it's not. You could forgive the good people of Kaikohe in the very far north for being a bit confused about what's happening to their big red shed. The warehouse said yesterday it would close its Kaikohe store in June with the loss of dozens of jobs, but today it did a U-turn. Our Northern reporter Lois Williams went to Kaikohe to find out more.
It was the worst news possible for Kaikohe's warehouse employees. The company told its 60 staff yesterday they'd be out of a job in June. It said it had been unable to renegotiate its lease and the store would have to close. The first union organiser, Gary Hetherington, says that came as a bombshell.
There was a lot of upset employees
yesterday at the meeting. This is devastating, not only for them, but it would have been devastating for the community.
It was a rough night for the 60-odd employees. Kaikohi's not a town where jobs are easy to come by, but by midday today, the warehouse had changed its mind. It had been able to reach agreement after all with its landlord, it said. The landlord, John Levers, had wanted to sign the company up for a long-term lease, but he says the warehouse wasn't having it.
For them to turn around and say that, you know, this happened because of the landlord, well, yeah, the landlord was trying to stand up for himself, and unfortunately the big bully just got too much. So now I've folded and they've got what they want and I'm screwed.
The warehouse general manager, Pejman Okavat, as the tenant, has a different take on the deal.
Actually, we're the tenant here, and ultimately he rejected our offer. So from where we are, we had no choice.
Gary Hetherington says the warehouse has agreed to a 2-year lease. And while that's no guarantee Kaikohi's red shed is here to stay, it's some consolation for anxious staff wondering how they were going to feed their families in a couple of months.
It's something that we can work on and build on. And there's no guarantees that it won't close in 2 years, but there's no guarantees that it will be closing in 2 years.
There are those in Kaikohi who will tell you the warehouse ripped the heart out of the main street when it arrived. All the mum and dad businesses, the shoe shop, the sports gear shop, the menswear store, they all folded. Dot Field, who lived in Kaikohi for 50 years, says the warehouse provided jobs, but it changed Kaikohi forever. She says if it does go, those little shops are gone for good.
And it's very sad to see. It's just like big boys playing with big cats playing with tiny little mouse. That's what it's like. Kaikohi people don't deserve this.
But down the road at Bridgestone Tyres, the boss, Mark Anderson, says business is picking up in Kaikohi, and not just for him. The chair of the Kaikohi Business Association says it would be disappointing if the warehouse left town, but not the end of the world. He believes the little town that's been in the doldrums for so long is starting to move again, partly because of the growing fame of the Far North cycle track.
We had the busiest month ever in the history last month. Plenty of guys are looking for tradesmen, struggling to find them. And there's only about 3 or 4 empty shops in town, so the mood is a lot better in town than it has been for some time. There's a real sense of optimism that the slide that has happened for so long is to be reversed and is about to go back the other way.
And the news that the warehouse is not closing, at least for 2 years, went down well with shoppers in Kaikohi this afternoon.
You know, this is the cheapest place for beneficiaries, for older people. It's convenient, and if it closes, it's going to be devastating.
It's really exciting. You know, Kaikohi is not dying.
In Kaikohi for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the latest from our team at the Commonwealth Games. Parents, teachers and pupils on the Otago Peninsula protest changes to school bus routes, why the entire country will now have the opportunity to make submissions on land at risk of climate change. It's a big story, plus the Minister's joining us later on this EQC figure, now 270 million spent on re-repairs. We'd love your feedback. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona next with today's business news, but here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
One of the country's largest Tongan groups says it's afraid an Immigration New Zealand profiling program could unfairly target Pacifica people. The department has been modelling data, including the ethnicity of overstayers, to prioritise which people it should take action against. Most overstayers are from Tonga, Samoa and China. The warehouse in Kaikohi is denying it bullied its landlord into signing a new lease. The company blamed the landlord, John Levers, when it announced last night it was closing. But this morning it said it can now stay open because he came back to negotiations. Mr. Levers says he was trying to stick to his guns but was forced to sign the lease. RNZ says it will release to MPs a voicemail message from the Broadcasting Minister to the chair of its board if it can recover it. RNZ bosses have apologised to a parliamentary select committee for inadvertently misleading it over a meeting that forced broadcaster Carol Hirschfeld to resign. National's Melissa Lee asked RNZ to hand over all communications between Ms Hirschfeld and the Minister Claire Curran, as well as a voicemail left on the phone of the RNZ board chair, Richard Griffin. The government has begun winding down public funding for large-scale irrigation following a review. The Finance Minister says the move to wind down Crown Irrigation Investments, the company formed to provide bridging finance to irrigation schemes, is in line with the coalition agreement. Grant Robertson says existing commitments will be honoured. He says large-scale private irrigation schemes should be economically viable without public financing. A spokesperson for the whale rescue group Project Jonah says more pilot whales may come ashore on the west coast in the next few days. A pod of 38 whales stranded yesterday on either side of the Okuru River mouth, south of Haast. A short time ago, the Department of Conservation had to put down the 12 surviving whales. An attempt to refloat them this afternoon had to be abandoned due to rough seas and strong tidal currents. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Let's do business news now with Nona, who is on the other side of me. Nona, it's nice to see you. There are some measures and numbers and things that give us a sense of how the economy is going. Strong commodity prices, job advertisements, and a lot of them. What are the latest numbers telling us?
Well, we've got some new numbers today. The commodity prices is an interesting one. So we've had gains, monthly gains, 3 months in a row, which is actually now the highest level since mid-2014.
Can I ask a difficult question? What commodities are we talking about?
Oh, okay. Well, commodities, of course, New Zealand is a big exporter of commodities. Number one export,
milk.
Dairy.
Yeah.
Yes. And that was, it's a very strong rise, 3% gain there. Smaller gains for meat, wool, and forest products. Those are other commodities that we export. We also have aluminium and let's see.
So there is a general commodity measure, right?
Yeah,
and,
there's a number of things.
Okay.
It's a basket of things, really.
Right. A nice basket.
A nice basket of
right.
raw materials is what commodities really are.
Right.
You know, they tend to be that.
And so strong commodity prices.
Very strong commodity prices. Well, strongest levels since mid-2014. It's a while, you know. And remember, mid-2014, you know, it's when our dollar was really high, dairy was really high. Those, you know, if you think back to those times, that was just before our, you know, when our dollar was nearly, what was it, the parity party for the Australian dollar?
Right. Yeah.
Well, that didn't last very long. But anyway, that's what we were talking about. So that's, you know, that was a fairly strong part of our economy. And it's reflected in these gains that we've seen. Now, the job ads is another one. So job ads rose slightly, only a slight rise, but low unemployment and a tight labour market means that these job vacancies really are going to start to shrink just because our economy simply doesn't have the capacity to keep growing.
It's still not driving wages up though, is it?
Well, you know, I was talking to a fellow, it was quite interesting. He was saying that part of the reason why is that if you look at the workforce today, it's more of an international workforce, so that people will send some of their work offshore. Say it's a call center or it's something else. So there's a lot of the supply of labor in the world is one of the things you have to consider now. Of course, that's also starting to shrink too. So wage pressures are definitely building, and we can expect to see that coming our way. Interestingly, there were a lot of job opportunities on the West Coast, Northland and Southland, who had like a lot of jobs there.
And the Northland and the West Coast, they will be delighted to hear that.
Yes, there are job opportunities there spread right through to the regions.
It's good news. What did the markets do today?
Well, it's just a crazy day as usual with the trade war looming. We had crazy swings on Wall Street. The New Zealand index, we were up yesterday. Today we're down. Other markets in the Asia-Pacific region, they're all mixed. So New Zealand, we were down 0.4% today. That's 34 points to 8,364. I noticed that the Australian market was up. So yesterday it was a little change, but hey. The New Zealand dollar, though, is steady at 72.9 US cents. It's pretty high. 94.8 Australian, also quite high. And 51.8 pence.
Nona Peltier, our Auckland-based business reporter, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the weather now with Met Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. With high pressure building across much of the country, there's plenty of fine weather across this, particularly across the North Island. Many spots staying fine and dry. Highs in Auckland at 23 degrees Celsius. Just a little bit of patchy cloud here and there. Perhaps a shower out towards Great Barrier Island and on the eastern coast of the Coromandel. But for most of the North Island, there's plenty of dry and fine weather in store for the rest of Friday. Temperature-wise, highs around about 20 to about 23 degrees Celsius. Heading southwards down towards Wellington, a fine day here. Plenty of sunshine through the daytime. A little bit more cloud though arriving in the afternoon or evening, and temperatures around about 19 degrees Celsius. And there's plenty more fine weather down the eastern coast and down across the southern parts of the North Island as well. Heading down on towards the south side, we'll find some higher cloud feeding across in towards Canterbury through the daytime. But for many spots around Christchurch northwards, it's like to stay dry throughout the daytime. Just that cloud thickening up and highs here of 23 degrees Celsius. But there is some rain in the forecast for Fiordland and also down towards Southland and Otago as another front moves up from the south. Some wetter weather to end the day in Dunedin, and we are going to find some slightly cooler temperatures in store as we head through in towards next week. And that's it from me.
Yep, some black clouds over Invercargill, Otago on the west coast. Thanks, John. Let's go now to the Commonwealth Games. Our reporter, Joe Porter, is joining us live outside the Velodrome. Joe, I'm delighted you're with us, but I've absolutely no idea what's going on. So please tell us what's happening.
Well, John, I can tell you, and very excitedly, that New Zealand is guaranteed to get at least one medal tonight. The women's team pursuit have qualified second fastest for their final, so they're guaranteed to get at least a gold or silver medal. They're into the gold medal ride, so New Zealand is guaranteed its first medal tonight. Whether it will be gold or silver, we're yet to find out.
So that is the women's team
and of course,
pursuit.
Coming up later,
Gosh,
the men's
Joe,
sprint team are in action, the defending champions at the Commonwealth Games, as well as the women's sprint team and the men's team pursuit. But it's the men's sprint team that the big focus will be on. Defending champions at the Commonwealth Games. They were 6th at the recent World Champs. Bitter disappointment for them. So they'll be looking to stand on the top of the podium tonight and wash away that bitter taste. I went behind the scenes with the New Zealand track cycling team and found out the riders, many of them are very talented, including Raquel Sheath. They've got many skills that extend far beyond the bike. One of the major perks of covering the Commonwealth Games is getting to meet incredibly talented individuals such as the New Zealand cyclists. But some things you may not know is that they have more than just one talent, hidden talents in fact. Nails being one of them. And I'm lucky enough to be indulged by these two lovely talented women who are giving me what we hope will be a great omen towards the cyclists winning medals on the Gold Coast. And of course my daughters will be incredibly jealous because this is one professional job. What gave you the idea to come up with the concept of these such wonderful nails?
I am a magpie. I love glitter. It's literally my trademark. So I was like, it has to include glitter. It has to be sparkly. And the girls love glitter too. They all love it. And then I was like, why not chuck a bit of black, like kiwi? Yeah, get it in there.
That's awesome.
And we came up with a good design. So
it's fantastic.
Everyone got their own, got to put on their own individual thing.
Very cool.
Which is cool. So.
And what do you think we should go for here?
I reckon we should do a fern and maybe a little New Zealand next to it.
Representing New Zealand at a Commonwealth Games is a dream come true for most athletes, though Bryony Borther concedes the pressure to perform can manifest itself in some strange ways.
A couple of nights ago I had this dream that we raced in the qualifying of the team pursuit, and then they just forgot about the finals and no one ended up racing the finals.
Luckily for Kirsty James, her dreams are filled with gold.
I can't say I've ever dreamed of missing a race.
Dreamed of standing on the podium?
Yeah, all the time, ever since I was a kid.
Yeah?
Yeah.
For some riders, like Games debutant Elise Andrews, just getting to the Gold Coast is reason to celebrate.
You always dream, but I had no idea that it was sort of something that I could aim towards until maybe a few months ago.
While some riders have climbed their biggest mountain in getting to the Games, others have far bigger goals, and nothing less than gold will satisfy Ethan Mitchell and the defending champion men's sprint team.
This has been a target for us. We're defending gold medalists here, so to go out there and defend that, well, yeah, it'll make us super happy around how we execute, and then obviously as a 2-year benchmark into Tokyo, it'll just prove some stuff to us and keep us tracking in the right direction.
Regardless of what happens on the track, Mitchell's teammate Sam Webster's hair will always be worthy of a gold medal. And no matter what happens, Sam's hair will always look good.
It'll look great, yeah, he's looking very nice at the moment.
What does he use, Pantene?
I don't know what he uses, man. I think it's a mixture of stuff, but no, he looks after himself really well, and he's certainly in good form, so we're excited to see how he goes.
He's an impeccably groomed man.
He looks great, doesn't he?
So that is Joe Porter. We've just lost him. He's dropped out. His link to us from the Gold Coast. But let's confirm what Joe told us at the top. Very exciting news. So the women's team pursuit, this is in the cycling at the Velodrome, of course, they are into the final. It's a gold or silver final against Australia, local heroes. So the women's team pursuit team are going to get a medal, either gold or silver. The men are also highly fancied, as Joe was saying. Andrea Hewitt, who was an early chance for a medal, being talked up, and she's a fantastic competitor. She had, by her standards, a disappointing triathlon. I think she came in 13th in the women's tri. Very competitive field, very fast times in hot conditions. Andrea Hewitt coming in 13th. The women's team pursuit are going to get either a gold or a silver in the cycling. It's 5:45. Bells have been tolling in cities across the United States, marking the moment 50 years ago that the civil rights leader Martin Luther King was gunned down by a white supremacist. They rang out 39 times, one for each of Dr. King's years. The main event took place at the motel in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, where he was murdered. The BBC's Nada Tawfik was there.
What better way to honor the apostle of nonviolence than with a massive march for equality? Joined in purpose and united in action, they were led forward by the son who bears Dr. King's name. Precious Lord, and the celebration of his life continued right onto the site where he spent his final moments. The large crowd rejoiced as artists performed with soul. But they also reflected on the civil rights hero's unrealized dream. Faith leaders and activists spoke passionately about the injustices that prevail.
We must show the world that while an assassin's bullet killed the dreamer on this sacred ground, on this day 50 years ago, he did not kill the dream.
Thank God for Dr. King's dream. He said we can do it better together. He lives. He lives.
Reverend Jesse Jackson returned to the spot where he witnessed the assassination.
And every time the scab comes off, the sore is still raw. The blood still oozes. This is the site of the crucifixion. But not far from here is the resurrection, the new hope, and the new possibilities.
At 6:01, King was silenced by a sniper. Bells rang 39 times to honor the number of years he lived.
Picking up Dr. King's unfinished business was the theme of this commemoration, with the central question, where do we go from here? Many believe Dr. King provided that answer so many years ago.
Nada Tawfik in Memphis, Tennessee. Home again. This is a big story in New Zealand. The entire country will now have the opportunity to make submissions on a proposed precedent-setting New Zealand first use of the Resource Management Act that could pave the way for land evictions. Now, a week ago today, we continued a series of stories about 16 homeowners in Matata, a small town between Tauranga and Whakatane, who may soon be forced out of their homes and off their land because their local council says it's too dangerous for them to live there anymore. They asked for all New Zealanders to be allowed to have a say because a precedent will be set that will be binding in coastal communities, communities under threat from climate change, sea level rise, you name it. And the precedent could be used in the future to evict anyone at risk from climate change, for example. But the residents were shot down. But then, the day after our story went to air, the council changed its mind. This is important. Zach Fleming did the original story. Here he is with more.
Yeah, at least we've had one small win.
Far from ecstatic, but it's a starkly different Rick Wally to the one I spoke to last week.
It doesn't matter what we say, they're not going to change anything anyway.
At the time, hope was running out that Rick would be able to stay in his family home after the Bay of Plenty Regional Council voted to limit a proposed plan change, one that'd force him and his neighbours off their land, to only people directly affected. That's around 400 locals. But now it's done a U-turn.
Decided that we would ask the regional council if they would change that to an open notification, public notification.
And public notification means that anyone from New Zealand can make a submission on this now?
Correct.
Whakatane District Council Deputy Mayor Judy Turner. And you might want to use your right to have a say on what's happening in Matata because
it is going to open up a huge can of worms, which is their words.
It will be an example that all councils refer to when they're considering similar issues.
GNS Science Natural Hazards Planning researcher Emily Grace says if Rick and his neighbours have their land use rights removed under the RMA, it'll set a precedent that could be used elsewhere, like when the seas rise due to global warming.
It is not just a Matata problem, it is nationwide.
The problem, simplified, is the Whakatane District Council let Rick and his neighbours rebuild after a massive landslide cascaded down the steep coastal hills behind their street in 2005. But then 7 years later, in 2012, it changed its mind and said they had to leave because it said the risk of another event couldn't be mitigated. The residents of Clem Elliott Drive disagree. They want the right to stay. Whakatane District Council says it changed its mind after lobbying for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council to limit notification because it couldn't find contact details for everyone in Matata.
There's quite a bit of multiply owned land in Matata, and we had real difficulty in locating a number of trustees and people with interest in some of this multiply owned land so that we could have given everybody that chance to make a submission. And there was also some pressure from outside to make it more generally notified.
Local Government New Zealand President Dave Cull says it's a good thing that it's changed to public notification.
And I think commendable in that it puts the whole process out into the public. It's transparent and it will assist the public to understand the issues that are being resolved here. If it hadn't been notified and it was a more closed process, there could be increasing misunderstanding of what is actually having to be done.
But Local Government New Zealand won't be making a submission.
We don't have a view on the rights or wrongs of what they're proposing. What we are more concerned with is to support our member councils.
People within New Zealand need to have their say because it's going to affect them hugely if they live by the coast or if they've been in a natural disaster or if they have a natural disaster happen to them. So they really need to have a say in how this plays out because it will affect them at some stage in the near future.
Or, Dave Cull says, some guidance from central government might be useful.
While this situation will create some precedents, each situation around the country, and there will be more and more of them into the future, will be different, which really underscores why local government has been asking central government to give more clarity and guidance in how we deal with adapting to the effects of climate change, particularly with regard to liability or fiscal responsibility.
The time frame for people to make submissions is yet to be released. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
When we get that information, obviously, about the time frame, we will let you know. Zach was the reporter, Nick Monroe, the cameraman on Zach's story. Just going to go back to the story we broke at the top of the program tonight at 5, which is that the total cost of repairs done under the Canterbury Home Repair Program, which was the EQC and Fletcher's Home Repair Program, is now hit $270 million. Last night we broke with the news it was $160 million, but that was only for managed repairs. EQC have today told us an extra $100 million has been paid out in cash settlements for people who are going to take care of their own re-repairs. A lot of feedback coming in from Christchurch. Thank you. This person says, you keep saying re-repairs, John, but we had re-repairs. And EQC was strong to bullying in their efforts to make us use the same builders who'd done the crappy job in the first place. Not surprised at all, this person says. Glenn from Christchurch says, well, this is appalling. The other question is, what proportion of the re-repairs does this represent? Are we only 10% of the way through? Obviously, we don't know that. But $270 million spent on re-repairs so far. The Minister herself, who has also only found out these figures, will join us live after the 6 o'clock news, which is 6 minutes and 5 seconds away. The head of the... No. What should we be doing? The head of the Environmental Protection Agency? Parents, teachers, Parents, teachers and pupils on the Otago Peninsula hit the streets today to protest changes to bus routes. They say route changes made by the council last year have resulted in pupils having to grapple with long walks, busy roads and nonsensical and dangerous drop-off points. This morning, more than 40 staff and families from Tahuna Intermediate gathered at the bus stop on one of Dunedin's busiest streets and together walked the almost 2k to the school. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown went along with them.
As far as protests go, this is one of the most smile-filled you'll find. And while this group carried school bags rather than placards, they still want their message to be heard.
What's your message to the council?
We should keep the bus so that we don't have to walk because it's pretty unsafe for everyone.
That's 12-year-old Hazel McDermott from McAndrew Bay on Otago Peninsula, a Tahuna Intermediate pupil who is unhappy at changes the Otago Regional Council has made to her bus route.
Did you ever use the old bus route when it existed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used it almost every day, most of the time.
And how different is this one?
It's quite a long walk compared to, because the other bus used to drop us right outside school, but this one drops us all the way at McDonald's, so we have to walk.
That walk is 1.7 kilometres down one of Dunedin's busiest stretches of road during the commuter rush, crossing 5 intersections, only one of which is controlled by lights. Ironically, today the bus didn't even get to the stop on time to allow children to make the walk before school begins, a delay that reportedly isn't uncommon. Hazel's parents are unhappy about the situation, and they're not alone. Several parents joined this morning's protest to vent their frustrations. Among them was Jason Graham.
You're talking here about children who are 11 and 12 years old going to Tahuna, and I've watched my son and a couple of others try to cross the road by themselves, and they aren't quite that aware of traffic that an adult would be, and it really is quite a concern.
Jason Graham says they have suggested alternatives to the council which would involve slight changes to the timetable and minor detours. However, so far they have had no concessions. Tahuna Intermediate's principal, Tony Hunter, fears the worst if change doesn't come.
All the parents that I've spoken to do have concerns for safety. Obviously their children would be doing it independently, which is good for them to be responsible and independent, but a large group of people walking, crossing all those roads and at the busiest time of the day, yeah, it is dangerous, potentially very dangerous.
And it's not just the intermediate pupils who are affected, but students at King's High School, Queen's High School and Bayfield High School, more than 120 children all up. Tony Hunter says 3 schools have organised their own bus service, but they can't continue to pay for that, and from next term the public bus will be the only option. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
The Otago Regional Council says it's looking at what it can do about the safety issues raised this morning. Otago Regional Transport Committee Chairperson Trevor Kempton told RNZ the council understands the concerns of the people on the peninsula and staff are doing their best to minimise their difficulties, including looking at new bus timetables. He says the specific safety issues raised this morning are being looked at in conjunction with the Dunedin City Council. We will update you on any developments on that. A lot of feedback coming in from Christchurch. This from Jennifer. It's an email. Hi John. After the September quake, my home was assessed by the Australian ex-policeman and a Kiwi retired builder. The Aussie told me they were not allowed to go through the manhole to inspect possible damage under the floor because of the risk of more quakes occurring while they were under there. He did take some photos by lying on the floor and putting his head, shoulders and arms through the hole and clicking his camera's shutter. On the floor itself, the Kiwi used a laser to determine whether the floor was level. My repair has been fine. I had a good experienced builder, contracted to Fletcher's. My house, being built by my father, a carpenter in 1949-50, had proper foundations. Thanks to his skill and knowledge, all has been well, and the largely superficial repairs have been fine. Friends and colleagues, however, have not had an easy time, and their stress levels are really worrying. I wonder how many others were fed for fear of the quakes we can't go under the floor line. We spoke earlier in the program to Peter Woods, who is a lawyer with Anthony Harper. He's representing over 200 claimants against EQC or the Canterbury Home Repair Program for faulty repairs or disputed insurance payouts. And he says the vast majority of the work he has dealt with, and this is a reasonable sample because he has over 200 claims, has been work for under the floor, foundation work, structural work to foundations, structural damage to foundations, which was not detected often in the initial scopes. So cosmetic repairs were done to plaster in the walls, paint jobs, chimneys, some roofs, some cracks in the walls. But under the floor, where the real structural damage was, the repairs were inadequate or the scopes didn't notice the work at all. And that is what we're starting to see now. $270 million so far spent on re-repairs. We broke with that figure at the top of the program tonight at 5, and the Minister herself, who's only had that figure for as long as we have, we think, will join us after the news at 6, which is next.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. One of the country's largest Tongan groups fears an Immigration New Zealand profiling program could unfairly target Pacifica people. The department has been modelling data including the age, gender and ethnicity of overstayers to identify which groups are more likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime. It then uses that information to prioritise which people it should take action against. Most overstayers are from Tonga, Samoa and China. Malino Maka from the Tongan Advisory Council fears Pacifica people could be unfairly targeted like they were in the 1970s in the Dawn raids. Camille Lakshman, a lawyer specialising in immigration and refugee issues, says using ethnicity as part of the profiling has the potential to further marginalise certain groups.
It is seriously concerning simply because it will be based on race. So if somebody is from a particular country, of a particular race, they will be deemed to be in this class. And a certain approach then will apply to them, a predetermination in how they are looked at.
Kamil Lakshman, the Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway, denies the program is racial profiling. The warehouse has denied bullying its Kaikohe landlord by threatening to pull out of the far north town. The warehouse had said yesterday it was closing its store because it couldn't reach a lease agreement, but reversed this decision this morning, saying the landlord had come back to the table. The landlord says the company drastically cut the terms of the lease and threatened the closure to bully him into signing. But the warehouse's chief executive, Pejman Okuvat, says it was genuinely preparing to leave.
The comments about we forced him, actually, we're the tenant here, and ultimately he rejected our offer. So from where we are, we had no choice.
Mr Okuvat says he's delighted to be staying. The Broadcasting Minister Claire Curran is at odds with RNZ's chair over the events leading up to the resignation of Carol Hirschfeld. RNZ's top management went to Parliament this morning to try clear up what happened over a meeting between Ms Curran and Ms Hirschfeld. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
RNZ's chair Richard Griffin apologised to MPs for inadvertently misleading them last month when he described that meeting as a chance encounter. It later emerged Ms Hirschfeld had lied to her boss and the meeting had been planned. Mr Griffin said the minister's office had called him in late March and effectively said, "We will handle this and would like you to stay out of it." But in a statement, Ms Curran said her staff did not say that, nor did they suggest RNZ should not comment. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
Figures from the Earthquake Commission reveal the cost of re-repairs in Christchurch has climbed dramatically. Yesterday, RNZ News reported the cost of managed re-repairs of quake-damaged homes had risen from a predicted $60 to $70 million to $160 million. Today, the Commission has revealed that figure actually stands at $170 million. On top of this, it says it has so far cash-settled 8,000 customers requiring re-repairs to the tune of $100 million. That brings the total bill to $270 million. Lawyer Peter Woods, who has taken cases on behalf of hundreds of claimants, told Checkpoint the final number requiring remedial work for botched repairs or damage that was missed could be much higher.
the claims for remedials now that are coming in are probably harder, probably more expensive, and taking more time for EQC to figure them out. So I'm sorry to say that the money they've spent so far is probably on the easier stuff. And it wouldn't surprise me if that figure's going to double.
Lawyer Peter Woods. The 12 surviving pilot whales out of a pod of 38 that stranded themselves on a remote west coast beach have had to be shot. The pod stranded themselves sometime yesterday on either side of the Okuru River mouth, south of Haast. The surviving whales were comforted by dock rangers, local iwi and other volunteers today, but rough seas and strong tidal currents in the adjoining lagoon meant a rescue attempt would have carried too much risk. Darren Grover from the whale rescue group Project Jonah says it is possible more pilot whales may come ashore in the next few days.
February last year, there were, over the course of 3 days, we had over 650 whales pop up at Farewell Spit. And we'd ask anybody on that coast to keep their eyes peeled for just across the weekend, just in case any other whales do come up.
Darren Grover from Project Jonah. It's 6:05. New Zealand is guaranteed at least silver in the women's cycling 4,000 metre team pursuit at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Meanwhile, the New Zealand men's track cycling team sprinter Ethan Mitchell says defending their gold medal at the Games would more than make up for their world champs' disappointment and prove they're tracking well for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, I mean, we want to go out and win every race, obviously, but this has been a target for us. We're defending gold medalists here, so to go out there and defend that, it'll make us super happy around how we execute, and then obviously as a 2-year benchmark into Tokyo, it'll just prove some stuff to us and keep us tracking in the right direction.
Ethan Mitchell. The Silver Ferns begin their Games campaign tonight against Uganda, and lawn bowler Jo Edwards has won both her opening matches in the women's singles. The Hurricanes lock Michael Fatialofa says he's grateful to be back playing again after a post-surgery infection threatened to end his career. Fatialofa has been named to start for the first time this season when they take on the Sharks in Napier tomorrow night. What was expected to be a 6-week rehab after knee surgery turned into 10 months for Fatialofa, and he admits it was tough times.
So I did nothing for pretty much 6 months. Yeah, it was tough time, so just appreciating just walking again, like stuff I took for granted, just walking, and got excited to jog again, and now I'm out there playing. I just feel grateful to be out there again, and I'm enjoying just being around the boys. It's a pretty lonely place, rehab.
Michael Fatialofa, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of Novichoks, the family of toxins that most likely laid low the former Soviet agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Alison Balance uses isotopes to follow in the bow waves of marine mammals. And this week's Culture Ambassador Paul Berrington celebrates techno's French connection.
And I drop into Nights at 10. We'll be talking to people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. We'll have an eye on books, music and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough. Mostly fine weather, however the odd shower possible about the East Cape, Coromandel, Auckland and Northland tomorrow. Canterbury fine with high cloud and scattered evening rain south of Christchurch tomorrow. Otago, also Buller and Westland fine, but a few showers about southern Westland at first tomorrow. Then rain spreading northwards through all areas during the afternoon and evening with isolated thunderstorms in Westland. For Southland, a period of rain tomorrow, briefly heavy, clearing during the afternoons, but a few coastal showers returning at night. For Fiordland, occasional rain, heavy for a time tomorrow with isolated thunderstorms, clearing later. And for the Chatham Islands, fine weather. RNZ National, it's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
The Chatham Islands will be delighted by the emphasis with which you said that.
Fine weather. It's always cloudy or, drizzle or shower. So I love saying, telling the Chatham Islanders, it's going to be fine for them.
Go the Chathams. Thanks, Anna Thomas. Thanks everyone for being with us. We're going to return, of course, to our top story tonight. We revealed at the top of the program tonight that the total cost of managed re-repairs of quake-damaged homes in Canterbury has risen to $170 million. Now, last night we broke news of $160 million, but, and it's a big but, on top of this, 8,000 customers have cash-settled re-repairs to the tune of another $100 million. So this brings the total bill for re-repairs so far to $270 million, or more than $250 million. The EQC Minister Megan Woods, who told us last night the previous government had left her with a mess, only learned of this new blowout this afternoon, I think at about the same time we were learning of it. She's had a meeting with Treasury and her office has spoken with the Prime Minister's office this afternoon. Megan Woods, who is the Minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission, joins us now live. Are you there, Minister?
I am, John.
Thank you for joining us. Can we go over the numbers? What do you believe now, or what have you been told now, the total cost of re-repairs is thus far?
$270 million. So that's the extra $10 million with the updated number from last night, plus the $100 million that I outlined to you that I'd asked for urgent advice from EQC on what the cost of those cash settlements were.
So cash settlement. So for people who get a bit confused by this, the $170 million figure, and last night we said it was 160, but it's been updated in the 24 hours since. The 160 or 170 million is money spent on managed repairs, so you're remaining as part of the Canterbury home. And there is a further 100 million paid out, I think, to 8,000 homes where they've said, actually, we've had enough of the Canterbury Home Repair Program, we're going to take the cash and do it ourselves. That's right, isn't it?
That's right, and I think for people that don't live in Canterbury and aren't used to these terms, the simplest way of thinking about this is, did EQC or EQR, which was Fletcher's, organise a builder to come around and repair your home, or did you get a cheque in the mail so you could organise that repair yourself?
Okay. 8,000 homes have taken cash settlement. Does that mean that we are talking about a very large number of homes overall who are part of the $270 million spent on re-repairs? How many homes do you believe now have had money spent on re-repairs?
So what we know, the figures that I've got from EQC today, is that there's been 14,000 that have either been repaired, cash settled, or otherwise resolved. So that means the otherwise resolved means people that had put in a claim saying, I think there was a problem with my repair, but that, the file had been closed because it was found to be no problem with the repair. So that full amount was 14,000.
Okay, so 14,000 homes have had re-repairs that cost money, right? And that is from, and sorry, forgive me, I'm just getting these numbers out of the recesses of my skull. That is out of a Canterbury home repair total of 67,000?
Well, that's the first time managed repairs is 67,000. Well, it's actually 67,747 homes.
So 10% of that is 6,700. If we double that, we get 20%, which is about 13,400. So the figure that has now had re-repairs is over 20% of those homes. Is that right?
I'm going to confuse you a little bit more, I'm afraid, John, is what that 67,000 number that the previous government always bandied around, what that didn't include and what I'm digging out now with the numbers I've been getting through from EQC today, is that didn't include people that had been cash settled in that first round.
Okay.
So the numbers get even more complicated. Sorry to make it even more complicated.
and they get even bigger. There's a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions I want to raise with you. One is that you asked your predecessor Jerry Brownlee in the House in June 2016, if I remember correctly, what the overall cost of re-repairs was, and the figure he gave you was 60 to 70 million. Now we must say that was an estimate at the time, but it is now 4 times that only 2 years later.
Look, that's right. And the thing that concerned me, it wasn't just that the minister got it wrong, the number wrong. As you say, that there was an estimate he was working on, the former minister, but it was the willful ignoring of the problem. So at the very time that this was happening, that these estimates were coming in that had proved to be wrong, that the previous government was scaling down the operation of EQC in Christchurch. They were laying off staff and they were saying the job was nearly done. We in opposition always said that we thought the previous government was cutting and running on Christchurch, and unfortunately that has been proved right.
What was your reaction when you got the figure of 270 million this evening?
Well, I can tell you it wasn't a happy reaction. It was one that needed my immediate attention. So I had a meeting with Treasury and I've asked for some urgent advice around what the continuing liability might be. That is one of the things that concerns me. The $270 million is a very large sum of money. As you identified that, that's more than $250 million. That's already been paid out. But what I also have to be concerned about is what the future liability for the Crown is.
And do you have any advice on? Do you have any advice on that from Treasury or from anyone so far? I'm really surprised because we've been talking to people for weeks now who say, and Peter Woods from Anthony Harbour, who's representing 200 claimants against EQC, says he believes there are thousands of re-repairs yet to be identified.
Well, that is exactly right. And so what Treasury are going to prepare for me is a range. Because we know how many unresolved claims are currently sitting in the system. That's a known. But the difficult part of this, and it doesn't mean it can't be done because it's difficult, but the difficult part is we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how many re-repairs are sitting out there that have yet to be identified. So that's what I've asked for, some urgent advice for myself and for the Minister of Finance around what that future liability might look like. But John, one of the things I do want to stress is that anyone sitting out there that needs their home re-repaired needs to have confidence that will still be done.
So is there enough money in the Natural Disaster Fund?
Look, well, that's one of the things that I also had another discussion with Treasury around today in terms of what that happens. So what will happen in terms of process when the Natural Disaster Fund dips below $200 million, that will trigger a letter to the Minister of Finance and myself and say we're likely to come asking for a triggering of the fund and to trigger the Crown guarantee. Now, the most likely date that I've been given that would require the Crown to contribute some money into that fund would be December of this year.
Okay. I'm going to do something unusual here, and that is that we've got Simon Bridges, who's going to be next from a media stand-up he did in Christchurch earlier this afternoon, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase or précis what he is about to say. And what he effectively says is, look, Megan Woods can play the blame game for all she likes. And she can, I think someone else described you as waving your hands. I don't know whether that was Jerry Brownlee or someone else, and saying, you know, that you are horrified and that the figures have caught you out and all of this kind of stuff. What Simon Bridges is saying is, you are the minister. What are you going to do?
Well, that's right. I am the minister, and I'm a minister that's prepared to accept responsibility, unlike the previous minister. So what I have already done, John, is that when I became minister and realised I wasn't getting the information I needed and that I didn't have confidence in the systems that were there to settle the remaining claims, I appointed an independent ministerial advisor. I've appointed a new interim chair into EQC, and we're setting about a change program, and that is the most important thing. I'm going to have a report back from Christine in the next few weeks. I'm going to get an update from her next week on the back of today's advice. There has been more action in fixing this EQC mess that the previous government left behind in the short time that we've been government, and then in the whole 9 years that Simon Bridges' government was in power.
Okay, I just want to reconfirm, $270 million on re-repairs. You think there is a significantly larger sum still to come potentially, although you have gone to Treasury for some projections on that, and we must point out that the previous projections were woefully inadequate only 2 years ago. And you're also saying you may trigger the assistance to the Disaster Relief Fund as soon as December.
That's right. As soon as that fund dips below $200 million, that's when the trigger comes for EQC to write to the Minister of Finance and myself and say, we're likely to come and need that Crown guarantee in the near future. So the $200 million is kind of the warning signal that it's coming soon. Right.
And what have you told the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office? Has she been briefed on this?
Yes, and I've also had a conversation with the Minister of Finance as well, and just let them know what the figure is, how that's made up, the further information I've asked for from Treasury, and that I'll keep them updated on it. One of the things that's very rich for Simon Bridges to say that I'm waving my hands in the air when his government, when they were in power, sat on their hands for 9 years and did nothing.
What about Sid Miller's hands? And look, well, Sid Miller is the CEO of EQC, and he has only been the CEO for 13 months, but actually, or 14 months. But at what stage is 13 or 14 months enough for him to start making a material difference? Now, We spoke to him earlier, and we're not running that interview now because it's been rendered obsolete by the fact that we have the figures, and we didn't have them when we spoke to him. But one of the figures I raised with him was $8 million in legal fees that EQC has spent last year fighting against claimants. If he is a change agent, if EQC are now going to step up and acknowledge the magnitude of their failure in repairs, why did EQC spend more money than ever before last year fighting its own clients in court?
Look, and I think that's a good question, and it's certainly one that I've discussed. I mean, of course, the Crown does also have to make sure that the fair settlements that are going through, and that people are being paid what they are rightfully entitled to, and that does cut both ways. And I have always acknowledged that. But I think the most important thing, John, is that the new interim chair, Dame Annette King, she's working really constructively with the board and with the management team to get the change in place so we can clean up this mess that has been left behind. We need to stop fighting things in court where it's not warranted. We need to settle people's claims. We need to get people's homes repaired so that these people can get on with their lives and get the hope back in their lives that they deserve.
Megan Woods, EQC Minister, who only found out about the figures about an hour and a bit ago. Sometime we were finding them out, I think. Thank you so much for joining us live. We appreciate it. The National Leader, Simon Bridges, says he doesn't support an inquiry into EQC, and the new Minister, Megan Woods, as I said to her a minute or two ago, should stop playing a blame game and get down to business. Mr Brownlee refused to be interviewed by me yesterday or today or provide us with a statement. National Leader Simon Bridges also declined to be interviewed yesterday, but this afternoon, when asked by our reporter Conan Young in Christchurch about the $160 million re-repair blowout that we identified last night, and remember that figure's gone up to $270 million, he said his government had done a good job and an inquiry into EQC was unnecessary.
Well, look, obviously it's all money, so I don't want to be flippant about that. Obviously, the smaller it is, the less cost there is involved in that. Ultimately, though, I think what you've got to say about EQC is it's a system that is working. Of the massive number of claims here, most us have been settled, and we're down to the hardest core of them around second repairs, third repairs, and those sort of issues. So ultimately, whether it was 60, 70 million that had originally been predicted, whether it's 160, 170 million now or even more, the cost level with insurance is the cost, and it will just need to be paid out.
It could grow larger though, couldn't it? Because that figure doesn't include cash payouts, which have actually made up the majority of settlements more recently. I mean, have you had any advice on how far it could actually go?
I haven't, but I think what you're saying is fair. I don't think we know at the moment. I come back to it. I think in relation to EQC, it's a system by and large has been good. There'll always be issues, difficult circumstances like this. We're down now to the hardest ones. But it's important that there is a process that people can follow and go through with EQC, and so they will be resolved ultimately, whatever the cost. I am concerned. I think Megan Woods, has stuck really to being an opposition politician, I should say, in this area. She had very clear views in opposition. Now she's the government minister. I would argue she should just get on with the job here, just as we would have, and stop trying to find blame in all of this. From our perspective in opposition, I've already made clear our views on EQC and by and large working well, but if there are tweaks that are needed, if there are things that need to be done here, we want to work constructively with the government on these issues and put, I suppose, the politics to one side, because, Canterbury deserves it.
But it's more than just a tweak, isn't it? I mean, 160 million and possibly going to grow as well. I mean, the government's really been handed a hospital pass here, hasn't it, from National?
No, because I think what I'm talking about in relation to the tweaks is more in relation to the actual settings, if you like, and the rules, the regulations. And I think she's talked about an inquiry. I don't think that seems necessary. I think fundamentally what we've got here in terms of those settings are okay. But if there are tweaks, we'll do that. In terms of the cost, I mean, my simple point to you is, look, the prediction was it'd be less than that. We now know it's more. We can't say what the final figure is, but ultimately with insurance, the cost is the cost, and it will need to be paid out according to the regime that is in place. And EQC has done that for the vast majority. We're now down to the hardest ones, and the important thing is that there is a process that these people can go through and get conclusion on these issues.
That's Simon Bridges speaking at a media stand-up. Our reporter Conan Young was there asking the questions in Christchurch earlier this afternoon. 23 minutes past 6. The head of the Environmental Protection Authority returned to Parliament today, insisting he hadn't misled MPs about ministers interfering in the removal of the authority's controversial chief scientist. Alan Freeth told MPs he'd apologised to ministers for Jacqueline Rowath's behaviour. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Alan Freeth had previously assured MPs he hadn't had any discussions with environment ministers regarding his chief scientist, Jacqueline Rowath, who resigned in February. That position was called into question when the Associate Environment Minister, Eugenie Sage, said she'd discussed Dr Rowath with Dr Freeth and said he'd told her he was aware of her concerns and was dealing with the issue. This week, Minister Sage changed her story and, blaming her poor memory, said that conversation never happened, but not before Dr Freeth had offered to reappear in front of MPs. Dr Freeth agreed with the minister's new story, that they hadn't discussed Jacqueline Rowath. But he was asked by National's Nick Smith why he had apologised to ministers for Dr Rowath's behaviour when the EPA is supposed to be independent. The apology followed the chief scientist's criticism of a tax on irrigated water, which was a Labour Party election policy.
I apologise to Ministers Parker and Sage on behalf of the EPA, and there was no link at all at that stage between any comments made by Jacqueline and any discussion of exit.
How do you reconcile the answer to my colleague Mr Simpson's question, that you found Dr Rowath's science of a high standard, with the fact that you apologised to Ministers Parker and Sage, and for goodness sake, as the head of an independent authority, why were you even discussing with ministers these questions about the chief scientist?
I wasn't discussing anything about the chief scientist. I apologise for Jacqueline's specific criticism of government policy, which was inappropriate from any staff member of the EPA.
National's Sarah Dowie asked Dr Freeth if a news article that was highly critical of Dr Rowath and which Minister Sage had forwarded to him was code for get rid of her.
So I think it's entirely appropriate for the Minister to raise any questions in regard to damage to the reputation or neutrality of the EPA.
National's Todd Muller asked what repercussions there were for Dr Rowath following the Minister sending the article, but Dr Freeth said he wouldn't discuss staff matters.
I did not connect that email with any of the Minister's views. I took it as I take any of these issues, that the Minister is concerned about media comment or publicity in regard to a Crown entity or the EPA. I have to say that my emails over the last year have been clogged with highly critical media comments and statements about Jacqueline Rowath and her views.
Dr Freeth also refused to tell MPs how much Dr Rowath's exit package had been, and he refused to be interviewed after the Select Committee, while Dr Rowath didn't respond to a request for comment. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Some breaking news. The New Zealand men's team, pursuit cycling team, has qualified third fastest on the Gold Coast, so will ride off against Canada tonight for a bronze medal. The women's pursuit team, this is in cycling, has qualified second and will compete tonight for a guaranteed silver or gold. Both those finals are happening tonight. The landlord of the warehouse's Kaikohe store says the company is a bully that used its staff as pawns in lease negotiations. The warehouse announced last night it was pulling out of Kaikohe in the far north, blaming the landlord, but reversed its decision this morning, saying that he'd come back to the negotiation table. The store's closure would have cost 60 people their jobs in the struggling far north town, but the landlord, John Lever, says it's not fair that the warehouse is painting him as the bad guy. He told our reporter Rowan Quinn the company had drastically cut the terms of the lease agreement.
I took some legal advice and they said, look, they're just trying you on, stick to your guns. You want the lease that you bought the building under, 4 years. So I've stuck to my guns, and then I got a threat last week that if I didn't sign, they'd close the store and they'd be telling the media and staff that it was due to not, to my fault, not agreeing to their terms. And so I took legal advice on that and was told, nah, they're just trying you on, stick to your guns. So I stuck to my guns, and they turned around and said, right, we're pulling out. And so I obviously absolutely gutted for those poor staff that I believe have just been used as pawns in this. And whether they were ever fully going to close or not, only if you were a fly on the wall at the board meeting would you know that. But so I've now been forced to forego $40,000, and I'm now in a position where I've had to accept a 2-year term instead of what should have been a 4-year term with 2 4-year rights of renewal.
So you are saying that you think they used the whole "we might close this" as kind of leverage to make you feel bad?
100%. It's corporate bullying, that's what it is. You know, I'm not a wealthy guy. I mean, that's my only investment. You know, I bought that and took a huge mortgage to do it, and I thought it'd be great to invest. And, you know, they've sort of tried to infer that I'm just some investor and I'm just being difficult. That's not the case. You know, it's just not the case. Now I've got problems with my financiers because they haven't got the security that they would have had with a 4-year lease, so they're going to want their debt paid, and, you know, I'm in the top. You know, I spoke to the CEO of the warehouse this morning and I said, look, you've talked about this negotiation since July last year. Look, I don't think I've been party to that. Could you please enlighten me? And his only response was, oh, well, now we've got an agreement that's great for all parties. I said, no, it's an agreement that's great for you. It's dropped me in the pop. And he's like, oh, well, you know, it's better than the alternative, ha, ha, ha. And we'll have a cup of tea one day and discuss it. And I just thought, yeah, you can imagine what I thought.
The warehouse has never forced John Levers into anything. He was the one who rejected the company's offer as tenants. It says it's delighted he changed his mind, allowing them to stay in town. Someone just pointing out that $40 billion was spent on the rebuild, and so $270 million of re-repairs in Christchurch is not a big percentage. That's $40 billion of everything. We are only talking about EQC and its Canterbury Home Repair Program. So we're not talking about high rises and remediation to roads and horizontal infrastructure and piping and new buildings. We're just talking about the Canterbury Home Repair Program, and that's where $270 million of re-repairs have occurred. That's Checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Earthquake Commission says the total bill for re-repairs to quake-damaged Christchurch properties has climbed to $270 million. The Tongan Advisory Council says an Immigration New Zealand program that profiles certain overstayers recalls the dawn raids of the 70s. The warehouse has denied bullying its Kaikohe landlord by threatening to close its store, saying it really was preparing to leave the far north town. And a dozen pilot whales that survived a stranding on a southwestern beach have had to be shot after attempts to refloat them were deemed too risky.
In one of the most expensive housing markets in the world.
You've got mum and dad and up to 6, 7 children. The price keeps going up, and where else are they going to go?
Pacifica and Māori families are forced into precarious housing.
It's a matter of getting beyond just the warm, safe, dry, secure to